Hello, everybody. Welcome to Feedback, episode 39. Today, we are happy to be joined by multidisciplinarians Tristan Perich and Lesley Flanigan, and we will be chatting with them about Chalk from 2012. Don't forget, you can always send questions ahead of time to feedback@yarnwire.org or join the live chat on YouTube or Facebook to submit questions in real time. So we're going to do a first for feedback and go immediately into an excerpt of the piece. Great.
Epic. So I think I'm just going to dive right in, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Of course,
Okay.
please do.
Well, my first question is actually for you guys, for Yarn Wire. How is it that you decided to ask Tristan to write a piece of music for you back in 2012?
I think it was something we just always wanted. We just always wanted to work with Tristan on a piece. Having, I think Russell and I had played Observations before that. Is that true?
That's right.
That's
we
true.
played that a lot, actually. Well,
Yeah,
many times.
many times.
I don't
And
know what constitutes a lot.
Yeah.
I remember hearing you guys play that, and so when we were talking about getting a piece, it was like, it was a kind of a no-brainer.
Totally.
Yeah.
But how did it came up for something, right, Ian? There was an opportunity.
Yeah, this was concert number 2, I believe, of the Issue Project Room residency. And so we had basically 3 evenings of Yarnwire performances over the course of the year. And the first was Nathan Davis and Pete Swanson, and then the second was this piece.
Okay. And Tristan, Yarn Wire comes to you and says, please write us a piece. What are you thinking about these guys?
Well,
No way.
I remember from the first shows you guys did, it felt like something I kind of wanted to participate in. I think you guys were always up high on the cool radar of ensembles, and it's almost tacky to say this, but the group, the instrumentation, and the name of the group are both evocative. They speak to material, I think, right? Like when I think about the name Yarn Wire, we're talking about the piano strings and the, mallet coverings. And it just brings me into a visual and sonic imagery that I think you guys embody very succinctly. When I hear that it's a 2 piano, 2 percussion group, that just immediately kind of sets off a creative mindset, I think, before we even spoke specifically about creating the work. So it was cool. It was cool to eventually do that. And these guys are all great musicians too. I've been working with Russell and Ian on a couple different things at that point, and multiple times. And it's nice to have an ensemble where all the musicians are like super hardcore. And I'll say one more thing, which is Laura always hears me talk about how much I love that that Enno Pape. I always, do I pronounce his name right? Is that?
Yeah, I think so.
I think
I think
if
so.
you're not German, I think none of us are probably pronouncing it correctly.
You're very close.
But it's, yeah.
And it's funny because it's a piece that's played, you know, it's on 2 keyboards because it's doing these on-the-fly microtonal tunings of piano samples. But like, and so it wasn't even all 4 of you, but to me, it captured like the repertoire that you guys were interested in too, which was just, it felt fresh at the time, and it felt like something I identified with, like you know, what you guys were doing as an ensemble. So.
Well, yeah, just to add on to that, like, I know that in general, when we think of Yarn Wire, we think of a fairly highbrow ensemble, like a kind of a place where you can really explore ideas. And you are very much an idea guy. And I think that as I, you know, was listening to this piece and thinking back to 2012 and the work that you were doing then, I think you were at a time in your artistic career where you were really diving into some pretty deep ideas. And so the opportunity to work with a group like Yarn Wire allowed you to like take these little ideas and just explode them out on a larger scale. You know, this is not a short piece. This is a 50-minute long piece. And it's a very intensely thoughtful piece. And actually with that, I would like to just, again, dive right into listening to Chalk. This next clip, I'd like to kind of set it up a bit. We've got 2 pianos, 2 xylophones, and 4 speakers playing 1-bit electronics. And you've talked about this as kind of a stereo stage setup where you have, you know, piano, piano, xylophone, xylophone, 2 speakers, 2 speakers. And there's kind of an interplay off of that staging. And so put that in your mind. And if we can play, it was clip number 2, we can listen to that for a minute. So I last night listened to this whole piece again for the first time since 2012. Since that performance, I actually sat down and listened to the whole piece. And I'm going to just say a few thoughts that came, not even thoughts, words that came to mind as I listened throughout the entire 50 minutes of the piece.
Yeah.
Mechanical, percussive, human, speed, meditative, constraint, restraint, focus, pinpoints, drumming circle, objects, typing, playful, intense, abacus, calculations, fragile but dense, like marbles, weight, time. So all of those words I wrote out as I was listening to the piece over the course of 50 minutes. And I'm curious if any of those particular descriptive words mean anything to you when you think back to having written this piece and the ideas that you had.
Yeah, well, definitely a lot of it. I think that constraint is a good word, although for me, I find words about imposing restrictions on things to be kind of problematic, because I don't like to think, for instance, of the 1-bit sound that I work with as a constraint. I think of it more as like a character that I'm then exploring musically, just like how any instrument has a character. You know, we don't think about the constraints of a violin when you're writing for the violin. You think about like, what can you do with the violin? So it's like it's an expansive view that I think. And so, but with this piece, the idea for it was to do this long piece of music for like the top of the piano. Like pretty much the entire piece is in the top octave of the piano and the xylophone. It's super high pitched, and it's 50 minutes long, and so it's intense, as you write. And it was at a time when I was really interested in this high frequency content, that the 1-bit sound speaks really well up there. These pure tones, you know, they don't have much body to them. The speakers don't need to project low end. You don't need much resonance there. And so they are reproduced in 1-bit, really, it's just like a beautiful, clean, but intense and very focused sound. And so the idea was to combine that register with the top register of the piano, which I really love. You know, it sounds like it's like this stuff, right? Kind of, I don't know if that comes through on Zoom at all, but like that super percussive high register, just to sit in there and not worry about ever leaving that space and just sort of explore it for a while. And what's nice is the xylophone, you know, also speaks very similarly in that register. So it kind of got to be these three sounds that I work with over the course of the piece. And mechanical was another word you used. And
I use that for a lot of your pieces, actually.
Well, I think it comes, you know, there's a circular process that I'm always going through, which is moving from thinking about the electronics, which means thinking about code and circuitry and systems, mathematics and physics and all these things, very structured space, to instrumentation, which is completely open-ended and more fluid in a way, except that some instruments, you know, like the piano and the xylophone, a lot of percussion have an attack and then a decay, and you can't, like, or in general, one doesn't sustain a piano pitch the same way as you can on a violin, for instance, where you just keep exciting the string and it keeps vibrating. So that lends itself, the attack, the kind of moment of a note starting is sort of an event in time, and that speaks to kind of the mechanical quality of it, because computation is all about moments in time. There's time now on a computer, and then there's the next step, and then some computations happen each step, and in aggregate you have computation. You have you know, using technology is sort of like effect of all these individual steps of the grid.
I agree with that. I think that the way the music is being performed has a mechanical quality to it. But I think also the fact that you chose this upper register and how these instruments all sound in that upper register, they kind of lose their xylophone-ness or their piano-ness, their speaker-ness, one-bit sound-ness, and it all just becomes, I think that's why it becomes so mechanical to me, is I'm just kind of hearing sound ticking away. It doesn't really matter what's making that sound. It's all just ticking and intersecting together, and it's very exciting, and it feels like something is being built and being like churned out. And yeah, anyways, I think that this piece kind of takes that mechanical quality even further because of the constraints you did like put upon yourself. Well, I know what you meant about there being lots of creative space and you don't want to think about it as constraint, but yet you had this rule, this kind of game you set up for yourself. I'm going to create a piece for the upper register for these instruments and see what happens. And throughout the 50 minutes, like you have all of the, it's actually kind of amazing for as much as it's meditative because you feel like you're in the same space for so long, you actually have all these pockets of changes in different ways that the instruments are intersecting with one another to create different shape.
Yeah, I definitely like what you said about losing the identity of the instrument, because I think this is something I've done in a few pieces, or in a lot of my work. I'm interested in like sort of when does an acoustic instrument blend so closely with my electronic sound, which is so lo-fi and so the opposite of accurate. It's so banal basically in how primitive it is. But when they sound indistinguishable from each other, when you have like a piccolo and a speaker and you can't necessarily tell what's what, I like that. And so in this piece, yeah, you have these extremely high pitches on the piano, and you kind of lose the piano-ness of it, but it's an aspect of the piano at the same time. So it's not like it's being obscured by the electronics, it's just being obscured by itself in a way.
I'd like to play another clip. This kind of goes back a little bit. And I know this was a clip that you weren't like so excited about, but it was a moment for me when I was listening last night, which characterized exactly what I just mentioned, how everything kind of lost its instrumentness and became just sound. The clip is number 3. And so this is going back a little bit to the beginning of the piece again, where the electronics first come in. I'll set that up and then I'll say a little bit more, but you can play that clip if you have. So that's about 9 minutes into the piece. And when I was listening last night, and he was listening to it with me, and I said, "Oh, whoa, are those the electronics? Were they there before?" And you're like, "No, they just came in." And I just had this like, whoa, I completely forgot what I had been listening to. I forgot there was a piano. I forgot there was a xylophone. And now this sound comes in, and I'm not even sure it's speakers. I don't know what I'm listening to. But it suddenly made me think about the instruments that I had been listening to before. And so I'm kind of wondering how the electronics in this piece in particular, I guess, how they serve as part of the ensemble, what they are or are not bringing out from the other instruments. Are they just another instrument? Kind of what role do they play in this piece, if any?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess it's something to do with like I don't like words like duality or symmetry per se, but it's setting up these sort of oppositions, right? So you have like the piano and the xylophones, this sort of musical dialogue, and then you have that with the electronics. And maybe in some other pieces of mine where it's just one homogeneous sound and the electronics, then that relationship is clearer. That conversation of what the electronics say about the instrumentation, what the instrumentation say about the electronics is like that is kind of more in your face. This piece, it's harder to pinpoint. It feels like a little just out of reach, I think. And I think that it was fun to write this piece, and there's an element definitely of like fun about it, because it was like, I knew I wanted to write a piece that was kind of difficult to listen to, right? It's all this high pitched stuff. And writing for you guys felt like I could do, this highbrow thing of like writing a difficult piece.
Sorry, I used that phrase. It's not what we really want to use, but it's true.
I actually love the word because it's just sort of, it's kind of setting up something that's challenging, right? It's thoughtful and challenging. So like, so this was the piece where also I got to spend like a couple minutes on the first 2 pitches before introducing the third pitch, and then like wait a couple more minutes or something to introduce the next pitch. So everything got to really like be overly done in a way, and I really liked to have an opportunity to do things like too much almost, like and I think that was sort of where I was at also. Composing was just like really living in these sounds and not wanting to feel the need to move on from them or anything. So when the electronics finally come in, I kind of just like, I guess I wanted to really to push into that into that experience of like, now we're there for a while, and then when the the acoustic instruments come in, like they sort of are playing the same thing that they used to play too. So like you're back there.
I don't know if there's I didn't think about this until right now, but there's something about the speed at which Russell and I are playing the xylophones and Laura and Ning are playing the pianos that I never thought of any one thing as too much of a thing.
Yeah.
But and I could see like a listener or viewer of the piece also being like there's physical effort through the whole piece as well, which is like a separate element of it too.
Yeah, totally.
Not related so much
you
to
guys
the
are
material,
working
but
fiendishly hard,
right?
And you know, there's plenty to watch for sure as an audience. I think listening to the recording, you miss some of that.
You get to kind of zone out and I mean, I actually love how the speed. Sometimes things go so fast that it just becomes this wash, right? It's just a paint stroke.
And
I was thinking
that to me is kind of also like a non-musical thing where you're just kind of listening to these sequences, right? And you get to kind of just turn off the part of your brain maybe that's expecting change and just kind of be in those sequences as kind of an abstract listening experience. And I like that. And it's reminding me of Issue Project Room, when they moved into their current space, and how it's very reverb space too. And so there's a lot of sound, a lot of high pitched sound in that room during this show.
Oh yeah.
And a lot of sound of the actual like action of physically playing the instruments. You hear the plop, 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 like the reverb from just the fact that you're literally hitting an instrument.
Yeah, that's pitchless.
That becomes a part of this particular recording.
Also, I mean, like you really hear. I heard this for the first time. Like when we're playing it, the electronics, they're not necessarily adversarial, but they are pushing us along. We're just like, it's so mechanically difficult. But like when you're listening, like when we cut out and I heard those sounds, after so long, they actually sound different than how I remember. Like, I don't know if it's because we were playing in the high registers so much, but when I hear those electronics, I almost hear a hammer attack, when they're happening too. And like, then like, and that's super weird because I know what those sounds are and I don't hear them live necessarily, but maybe after hearing the acoustics, it changes what we're hearing from it.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up. That's something that I experience a lot recording the one-bit electronics is that in concert, it just sounds like the pitch starting and stopping. And in the recording, you hear like a when the pitch starts and when it stops. And so when you get a pulse, and you'll hear this even more in the next that's coming up, you hear like instead of like and that I have some speakers here, like just to illustrate, these are the speakers I use in all these pieces for the most part. When the electromagnet at the back is activated with electronic signal, it can only move so fast, right? Like 1-bit signal is this abstraction of an audio waveform because it can't actually be reproduced by a speaker. The speaker can't move instantaneously in and out from a 0 to a 1 to a 0. And so there's kind of this momentum, like when the signal turns on, it kind of like pushes out from an inactive state and then it's oscillating, but it's never quite resetting. So you do have like a bigger push at the beginning and then a bigger pop at the end of each pitch. And so when the electronics are doing a continuous run, you don't get that. But as soon as there's any silence in between those notes, you get this percussive attack that you're talking about. Which is acoustically or whatever, completely different in the recording.
I like it. I wish we could hear that like more. It's so interesting.
Well, once you start listening to it, and you'll hear it.
You can never
not hear it.
Yeah.
Well, another clip that I wanted to play actually does kind of dive into more of thinking about the instruments and, the piano versus the xylophone versus the speakers. And I'm going to say this before we listen to it, that at one point during the piece, I kept asking, because my ears were trying to figure out which instrument was which. And I was like, oh, are the speakers, are they playing the higher frequencies? And Tristan kept saying they're not playing anything higher. then the xylophones and the pianos, they're all playing the same frequencies. And I realized, oh, they're lighter. It's a lighter weight. And then I started to distinguish between the piano was the heaviest instrument. The xylophone kind of occupied a middle weight. And then the speakers were the light and fluttery weight while everything's playing the same pitches. And I found that very interesting, that shape to the piece. So clip number 4 is a nice one to listen to for the instrumentation.
To mention that thanks for showing those score excerpts, but they weren't correspond. They weren't meant to correspond.
No.
I was like, can I read music?
You're trying to pretty loud.
So yeah, I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to say or you guys wanted to say about what I just said.
Yeah, I had something I was thinking about yesterday, which is that so yes, there's these different colors to the different instruments and sort of different timbres, different qualities of sound. And I don't think that there was not even like a plan for me that the piano would kind of have a heaviness. I knew that you kind of have a thuddiness in that register of the piano, but I wasn't composing necessarily with that in mind. It was just composing for 3 different sounds essentially, knowing what you guys can play, what percussionists can play with, 2 or 4 mallets or whatever, compared to a pianist, compared to electronics. And so that was something that kind of came out of listening in a way, in hindsight, that to me it's a little bit arbitrary which of the instruments is like, kind of lighter or not. I think that like in this piece, primary idea is like high register kind of sequences and patterns that interact. And then everything else is kind of like details beyond that. Like it's almost like all you need to know about this piece is that it's a high pitched piece for 50 minutes that's like about patterns interacting. And like, then it just explores that in different ways. And there's lots to talk about there, but the point of the piece is just that. It's really not meant to be much more than that in a way.
Yeah.
What's your favorite part of the piece?
Well,
like what do you feel like kind of hits it just right?
Yeah, well, it's funny. The different parts do different things. I guess that maybe the part that felt the most like interesting for me, I guess, is a part, and I think we have a clip of that, is to where the electronics are on their own for a while. And they're just hanging out on a single pitch and the rhythm is shifting and it's playing along with the stereo field.
Do you want to play that?
Yeah, sure. And then
or...
then the instruments come in. But it's a very austere moment. And I like when I kind of got to like feel like that's where what I wanted to, it's like the artistic liberty of being able to do something like that was really satisfying. But anyway, let's play that. Which one?
And number 5.
I think that might be my favorite part too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or I mean, among many
Me
parts,
too.
but yeah.
It reminds me of like, I don't know why I have this like image of like these like tiny little flocks of like mechanical hummingbirds just like like swarming around. It's really awesome.
Yeah.
I do love like listening to all the harmonies that you made, you know, and like just from shifting a couple notes, how they go back and forth. There's something really satisfying in this piece when you're listening to it, about all that. And like, there's a structure to it, you know, like passing through all these patterns. And I don't know, it's just, that speaks to me in this piece also.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Agreed.
totally. I mean, that's the nature of the piece.
Oh,
is sort
what
of
is this?
Small.
Oh,
What?
we have a question.
I think that means we have a question.
Oh,
Wait, what was
where
that?
did this come from?
A tiny gong appeared.
But I'll just finish that thought and then okay, go to the question. Sure.
Marcel asks, I'm wondering what it took for you to bridge Tristan's materialist approach with a more live performance-based approach, i.e., I'm wondering if Tristan's work changed your listening mode forever.
Uh,
I think this is to us.
Yeah. I mean, there's a sort of like very practical beginning answer to that question, which is, you know, we sort of alluded to this before, like the speed for most of the piece, with the exception, I think, towards the end of the piece where things kind of broaden a little bit more, is just right at the edge of like our like physical capabilities, I think, or at least for an extended amount of time, you know, for more than just a second or two, or, you know, a minute or two. And I think, you know, also the coordination with the electronics, there is also, just to be fair, there is that like logistical necessity that we have a click track, that we do play this. There is a click track that goes along so that we can coordinate what we're doing. And I think that does affect the way that I listen. Whenever I play with a click track, it does make for a very different experience of a piece than, you know, for example, even just hearing what we're listening to now, it's a really different experience for me listening.
Yeah, I wouldn't say necessarily that playing this piece changed the way I listen, unless like maybe I have a little bit more tinnitus because of this piece. But you know, yeah, it is so elemental, and like Laura said, it's so physical that only now, listening back, can I really hear the materials that we were kind of bringing to bear, you know. And this happens with a lot of pieces. It's like upon reflection, you're like, oh yeah, this is. And now, like, if you know we get a chance to revisit this piece, I think we'll highlight like those materials in this thing, you know, to make it even clearer.
Just to kind of piggyback off that question, because I was going to ask you guys what it was like to play this piece and what makes it, you know, is it enjoyable, challenging, engaging at all as a performer? I mean, you play so many pieces, like how this fits on the spectrum of performing a piece. And you can answer honestly.
Tristan, you know, you mentioned Popa in a conversation we had before this before it aired, I think. And his music, this is composer Ano Popa, who we've played, requires like the utmost in counting and like staying focused. In particular, a recent work we did, and that comes to mind when thinking about this piece, because we really like I remember those issue project room performances, like laser focused, actually really nervous, and like seeing the numbers on that LED screen and my heart going like I'm like, no, now's not the time for this.
Didn't you have like 3 Red Bulls before that one show though?
Yes, I was drinking 3 Red Bulls before the show, so that may have done it too. But you know, it's like it's so intense. But then when you get a chance to listen and to hear what the electronics are doing, and then they shift the timbres, it's like, it's also relaxing in a way, you know, because you're kind of in this, you know, zone of playing and then reactive listening.
Yeah, I think
like
it was...
Sorry,
go ahead.
I like that you mentioned that, because I think in a way it's my job as a composer to like make it relaxing and intense to play. Like I feel like I've done a bad job if you can't, sit back a little bit. At least in my music, I think so much about pacing and the importance of a change being just the right place. And so this piece has a slower pacing, but there's a lot of microscopic changes in a lot of the sections, not all of them. It's more slower pacing of changes in some. So often when I'm composing or when I'm revising especially, and I think about how can I achieve the same musical kind of experience, but without the score being kind of ridiculous, right? Because I can compose anything I want for you guys, and you guys need to work really hard to realize it, but that's not necessarily the point. The point is to figure out that sweet spot where it's like fun to play, where you're counting and it's intense, but it's not overly intense, because if you can say the same thing musically, but have the change be on a place in the measure that's easier to read, I'd rather that. So a lot of my composing process is kind of about like figuring out how to simplify and whittle away but keep the essence of the material.
Would you say this piece is forgiving in its speed?
Well, not so.
Or...
No, not at all.
Could we take a couple clicks?
You guys really rocked it, and I'm remembering also. I feel like it's important to kind of remember the context of that show and of residency of the show. I don't know if these are related questions. I'm cutting ahead.
No, don't worry. This is improv.
That like the residency that you guys did there felt very present. It felt very kind of like it, real time, and I think it was clear that this piece was like hot off the presses, literally. And like to me it tied into like, I mean, there's some like literal downsides, like at that show that you guys were playing the same percussion part, which then later like and if anything, that's like what makes it so clear that these guys are amazing musicians, that like you guys are in lockstep, and it's like really, you guys played that really, really well. But like to me, it's just like it was an intense, energetic moment of output for me that tied into sort of the experimental spirit of like just writing music and performing it, and then continuing, and then you guys had the next composer you worked with, and you guys were trying to just like you have this steady progression forward that feels very kind of adventuresome and or adventurous, I think adventuresome, and exploratory and very present, that I feel like I could tap into with writing the piece, if that makes sense. It was sort of like the spirit of the Issue Project room shows, and the venue, and the people at the venue, and the audience, and like it just felt like a very like a place where you could also try things that like are make you a little nervous or something, and so like that all fit together with this piece for me.
Yeah, it was that time was a real good vibe, I thought. And the process, even though on our side it was another question, it was pretty intense, but I think that energy that you're talking about, the piece really felt like it was of that time, and it stands up, I think, over the last 10 years too. It's like that spirit is really nurturing or something.
Can't believe that was 9-10 years ago. It feels like a recent piece of mine.
I know. It's awesome.
Okay, question.
We look the same in those pictures, right?
Yeah, Tristan, we need a couple clicks off the tempo, I think.
As we
Slow it down.
2 hours.
All right, what is this question? Who is this? Honotsu asks Tristan, do you consider your music independently to the acoustic in which it will be played, or do you have an ideal space for each piece you write? For instance, would you consider slowing down or accelerating a piece in relation to the reverb of the location?
not just the age of the performers.
I love that that question. Where a piece will be performed is always in my mind when I'm writing the piece, and I don't think of an ideal acoustic because each space is interesting. I think in a way my favorite performance spaces are kind of like galleries, like art galleries, where the audience is like in the same space as the ensemble, right?
Mhm.
Like literally, like there's no real separation. There's no kind of like they're on stage, you darken the lights, you kind of listen to the PA sound or whatever. I like to be in the sound and very aware of this sort of like sculptural mechanisms and how the sound is being made. And those spaces are usually bad acoustic spaces. They have a lot of reflections. They're not made for performances. But I find them to be the spaces that are most inspiring in a way.
Very alive.
Yeah, they're alive. They
Yeah.
provoke thinking about sound, about instrumentation, about the musicians, because you're face to face with them as humans, really right in front of you. But I also love a great concert hall space that is perfectly acoustically tuned and you can really hear everything. So to me, I don't want all my shows in one space or another. I like it when they shift around and you hear things different ways. And I always love that experience of like hearing it differently, because it just makes me think about different things. It's not like better or worse per se.
Yeah.
And no, I haven't sped up or slowed anything down in accordance to the reverb. You kind of had to deal with that at St. John the Divine, where this coolest thing happened with this subtonal frequencies that Lesley was working with, which you're going to use in your roulette show probably next week.
Maybe not as low, but yeah.
But and what's interesting is this roulette show, people are going to be listening on headphones, so you're not going to get any acoustic reverb to the tones that she's generating. But when you have a tone in the room, it can create, a standing wave, and it can interfere with itself, right? And Lesley's performing with an oscillator, so she might have a low tone and then go like, ooh with it. And while she's doing that, different ones of those create different standing waves. And so in the space you hear like woo, 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 woo. And it's super surprising. And what you're hearing is the reverb creating interference patterns with the pitches that are being played now. And it's creating all these interference patterns that are awesome. So, you tune your...
I change my,
to the reverb.
For that specific performance, I have to.
But no, I haven't done that. In fact, electronics are super locked in. There's a slow button, which gradually increases the tempo for rehearsal purposes, but I don't think anybody's ever used it in concert.
For this piece, with the reverb, since we premiered it at Issue with that like super specific sound that they have, we did play it in a concert hall in Sacramento and some other places that had wildly different acoustics. And once you hear, as a performer, like kind of an amazing performance in a certain space, that's almost the space or the energy that you want to repeat in other places.
Yeah,
and that's true. Really weird, because then, the Sacramento performance was really great, and as were others, but in the back of my mind, I was like, how do we capture the reverb of Issue in a performance? Which is totally impossible, but...
Yeah.
Well, that's one of the hard things with, anyone who listens to a recording and then they're going to go see the live performance, and the live performance feels like this letdown because you've gotten so used to the recording.
Yeah.
But if it had just been reversed, you'd feel differently. We really, human beings are so lame. We just get really stuck with this idea of what something ought to sound like.
But I think that, I totally agree. But I also think that like Issue Project Room is an interesting space. Yeah. So it leaves that mark. It's not like if you premiered it in some space that didn't have some interesting quality to it that you'd always want to necessarily recreate that or something. I feel like the energy, the audience, the space and stuff at Issue is unique. And so that sticks with us.
And I think the energy of having been doing this residency, I mean, that was a really neat,
Yeah.
interesting project. Like Tristan said, that you were just like, you know, commissioning these pieces and just banging them out, and all in the context of being in this performance space. It was just like, give me a new piece of music, we're performing it. Another new piece of music, we're performing it. You know, it's such a great adrenaline rush, I would imagine. Doing that.
Workshopping stuff.
And I think it was
it's like an incubator.
Yeah. And it was kind of the first time we really had that opportunity, I think, to do something on that scale. And so it felt really exciting and urgent, because we were like, yes, somebody is letting us do this. This is exactly what we want to do. And it was a really, really special time, for sure.
Well, I want to play another clip from Chalk, and kind of talk a little bit more, getting even bigger picture about kind of your philosophical approach to writing this piece, or really any piece. I'll let you kind of go where you want with it. But if we could play number 6, that'd be great.
Yeah. I remember playing that.
Just kind of,
Sorry.
I didn't mean to interrupt, but I was just kind of using this as an opportunity to kind of, you know, give us your sum up Chalk for Tristan Perich.
Sure.
So at that point in the piece, they're all just playing these 4-note patterns that are each offset. So it's kind of like just everybody's playing the same thing, and it's very sort of just driving, and it's shifting between these different chords. They're not really chords even, they're just single pitches that change. And for me, that's an easier part of the piece to listen to. And it sort of has this just kind of, it has a quality that I like it when I can get to, and I don't know if it's successful at all, but for me, it's like stepping into something that could kind of go on and, you know, just go on forever or something, like this timelessness, where you're just sort of just listening very much just in the moment and not necessarily the before or the after. I don't know. I think that this piece, I mean, maybe I'll just go back to thinking about writing something that's high pitched, and I think that, I don't know where I'm going with this, something about how each piece of music can sort of explore an idea. You mentioned ideas at the beginning, and that this piece is like focus on an idea. Some of my recent works are much bigger and they do more things, but I actually really love it when a piece of music can really focus and live in a space. And I was thinking about how the different registers of an instrument are themselves like instruments. And so like this is a piece really for that register. It's not, I mean, it's for piano and therefore, you know, whatever, but I don't know where to go with that. It's just thinking of music. For me, I like it when music is both a musical experience, but then also like a thoughtful kind of existential experience that you know makes us think about the world around us in different ways. It doesn't need, like, for me it's about like physics and math and stuff, but just that it has this non-musical component that is like a cerebral thing or something.
I love that chalk, and other pieces of yours do this too, especially when you kind of put this macro lens on the sound. You know, you're writing this piece with this very specific idea in mind, that the music, the sound is what it is. It's not pretending to be something else or take you into some narrative space or even have emote like some kind of feeling. It's not trying to add more than what it is. And I really think that's so beautiful. That's like, you know, I always refer to it as essentialism, where it is exactly what it needs to be at the time it is what it is. And I think this piece encapsulates quite a bit of that. And I think even to the extent that at times listening to it, I forget what the instruments are that I'm listening to. It's because it's not that it doesn't matter, but it's just all of these sounds and in this high register that I can just accept it. I'm not waiting for that low bass tone to come in or those strings to suddenly take us to a new place. It's just listening and being in the moment, very present.
Yeah.
Totally.
Did we have one more audience question, or did I see a phantom gong?
I think we're
oh, okay.
Well, honestly, I could keep on talking for a very long time. It's my kind of conversation.
Yeah.
I know that we've been going for almost an hour now. So
that's right.
Yeah, we're up at the top of the hour.
Maybe it's time to end on that note.
Yeah, well, man, thank you, Lesley, and thank you, Tristan, for hanging out with us today. This was a ton of fun and really awesome to revisit this piece. Yeah, really so cool.
Thank you.
Lesley, Tristan mentioned about a show at Roulette, a streaming show. Is that this Friday or next Friday?
That's next Friday. On the 26th at Roulette, I'm doing my first performance of the pandemic.
Nice.
It's a streaming performance. And when I was first asked about doing it, you know, I have not been interested in doing any streaming performances because you're not in the space where the music is being made. So how am I as a performer supposed to like kind of shape your experience as an audience member if you're listening on who knows what sound system you might be listening on? I certainly don't know and don't hear it.
Yeah.
But with that in mind, I thought of doing a performance where it's not about the space in which the performance is happening, and that's with headphones. So the whole performance will be on headphones, and the audience will listen with headphones direct to your ear.
Cool. All right. Not this Friday, but the next. And we don't have a available recording of Chalk, but Tristan did just come out with an amazing recording of 50 violins and 1-bit sound called Drift Multiply, which you can get on None Such Records. So easily Googleable. What was that, Laura?
It's on Bandcamp.
You can find it on Bandcamp.
You could find it on Bandcamp. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Great record.
All right. Well, thanks for hanging with us.
I have to run.
Okay.
And you'll play which you're going to outro with something, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think we're going to outro. Stay tuned, everybody, for the next episode of Feedback. Details coming soon. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss an episode. And we'll be having a patrons-only Patreon chat. I think it's this Friday.
Friday, March 5th, actually. So if you subscribe, become a Patreon subscriber, you'll get all the information and we'll be able to RSVP for that chat on the Patreon page.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.
See ya.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.